As I defended my city for an army of skeletal warrior dragons with my battalion of unicorns and fairies, I realised hex-based conquest games don't get any better than this. I've broken my fantasy bone because Age of Wonders 3 excels in areas it didn't really need to, and it surpasses most of the AAA competition within its genre in sheer content before it's even released. This fantasy romp has more depth than Gandalf's cooking pot, so sit with me as I explain why. Age of Wonders 3, for the uninitiated, is essentially Civilization 5, set in a rich fantasy world filled to the brim with lore, factions, and mechanical depth. Although perhaps unfair to draw similarities so early, this being the third in a series but still unknown to many, these comparisons make it easier to sink our teeth into the unknown, without feeling too alienated by something so new. This isn't usually a problem for me, but hex-based games and fantasy franchises are to a penny, so it's nice to establish similarities outside the convoluted genre. I'm a newcomer to Age of Wonders, and I didn't know what to expect other than elves, dragon people, and the occasional high fantasy reference thrown around for legitimacy. At first glance, it can be really pretty difficult to differentiate one from the next. We're not about first glances here, however, and I'm thankful for that, because behind what is essentially fantasy Civilization 5 lays a wealth of original content, taking that idea and stretching it out into an imaginative, hands-on, personal strategy experience. Since this is the third installment in the Age of Wonders series and the aforementioned crowded concept is looming over your conscience, I'm going to go ahead and show you about the coolest, most impressive thing Age of Wonders 3 has to offer right off the bat: the ability to create your own character for massive fantasy-themed Civilization-style multiplayer skirmishes. That's fully fledged MMO-style character creation in a strategy conquest game. You've got my attention, Triumph Studios. Players can either pick from one of the game's story mode heroes from the many different races in game, or create an entirely new hero, editing everything from their hairstyle, posture and skin to their clothing, base scenery, coat of arms and last name or house, with the ability to save it as a template for next time. We're talking MMO quality visuals and character creation for a top-down hex-based Civilization game experience. Not only do you have the enormity of the Civilization style strategy exploration and conquest, but you also have an almost identical diplomacy mechanic. And that's a good thing, because fantasy IPs can be hugely alienating to the uninitiated. This isn't a simple clone of Civ, however, but drawing comparisons between the two games make it easier for me to wade through the pages of lore attached to the franchise, which is much more appealing once you know what you're playing mechanically. Character creation is deep, solid, visually striking, and reminds me of Dungeons and Dragons in many respects, and the option to change your character's clothing and posture adds another level of depth that really fits with the trend that Triumph Studios are going the extra mile in places you really wouldn't have expected. A large and impressive part of Age of Wonders 3 is the combat. Instead of a traditional animated combat on the hexboard as you would expect from the aforementioned, Age of Wonders 3 seamlessly switches to a contextual battle screen similar to something like Total War, wherein you get to dabble around in turn-based strategy, which is dissimilar to Total War, using the units in your squad, which can be either created in cities or won in battle, or even volunteered to you by explorers on the map. Here you're expected to really rather quickly learn what each fantasy unit does and how to best use it. Units range prosaically from siege, ranged, melee and magical, either melee or ranged, to the less prosaic unicorns, dragons, ethereal beings, fairies, humans, elves and everything in between. After around 8 to 10 hours of playing, I can't say I've gotten a firm grasp on the total amount of units. They just seem to keep coming. It's not as though humans are one unit and elves are another unit. No, there are factions with their own units, some similar and others dissimilar. Many units sort of do the same job, but with different vulnerabilities and specialities pertaining to their race or faction. It's important to note that potentially any race can be commanded by any other race, so long as you meet the required criteria for an alliance, such as stumbling across them in the map and scaring them into fighting for you, or earning the hero unit in a diplomatic trade or something. Units are generally clustered in numbers of anything from a single unit to around 6 or so, but this is largely visual and each unit has a single health bar. However, as a unit diminishes, visually it does the same damage regardless. It's difficult to get a sense of how balanced everything is, and that's in part due to the fact that I have no idea how powerful a frigate ship would be in relation to a trio of squidlit bastards, and also in part to magical buffs, debuffs, and passive resistances and weaknesses. Each unit, race, and faction is vulnerable to different things, and hero units have a wide variety of ways to change the battle. That's when another layer of depth comes in, because in both the scenario-style missions and campaign, hero units can equip a full array of magical items just as you would see in World of Warcraft. This even includes mounts, which can change the way the hero unit moves, flying or running. There are also weapons changing their attacks, shields and armor pieces. These are all varied by loot type, epic, legendary and things like that, just as you'd expect from a fantasy game, and they offer an interesting new level of depth in diplomacy, since these items can be traded to meet you or their demands. Selecting a unit on the battle map will show 3 different coloured hexes. If an enemy is in range of the green hex, you're able to hit the enemy with 3 strikes. If the enemy is in range of the yellow, then 2 strikes, red 1 strike. That means if you choose to move into the red and the enemy is in range, you get 1 hit. If it's a melee, they'll hit you back for 1 hit. If you run into the yellow, you'll get 2 hits. You get the idea, right? It's something I haven't really seen in a hex game before, although it's similar of course to action points in RPGs and things like that. I didn't really appreciate how in some of the bigger battles your units are all lined up, considering the circular field of vision for the whole affair and the way that siege battles are around a castle, which is generally sort of spherical. Since I spent quite a few turns shuffling the left and right flanks into the centre to be effective. But that wasn't a massive issue. It can however be a problem when magic is being thrown about, because it wastes quite a few turns. Each turn, as well as city and character upgrades, you can select a new spell for research. There are abilities for the general purposes of the map, such as magically boosting city growth, as well as the abilities to conjure an allied unit. However, in battle, damage spells make up for the bulk of your magical prowess, either destructively spamming the toughest enemy units with your best pixie dust or buffing your allied units. Careful character progression is important, and in yet another level of depth, you can boost their attributes with a wide variety of upgrades throughout the campaign's scenarios. There's a lot to get your head around. Cities grow in both area and mass, and that's represented similarly again to Civilization 5, and as things expand and the city starts looking more vibrant, you can even see harbours if you build them and other buildings required to meet the criteria to build various units. I won't go into full detail about that here, but it's very similar to other games in the genre, only with fluffier names of course. It's certainly up to snuff though, and managing cities is a matter of managing happiness, food, growth, defence and money and things like that, which is standard within the genre, done well in Age of Wonders 3. As well as all this, Age of Wonders 3 features a few story campaigns for the various factions in the game. With a wealth of lore fed to you through competent voice acting, the campaigns are on maps designed for them and take you through an actual story, not a ham-fisted attempt to gel skirmish and story together. It's sort of how Dawn of War revolutionised RTS stories, but with fairies and unicorns rather than death bastards and power armour. The campaign does require structure management and building, so plays similarly to Total War in that regard, but with objectives and contextual voice acting fed through the experience, it's essential if you want to get into the lore of the game properly. I can see Age of Wonders 3 alienating a lot of people at first glance. It has a rather generic name, and the curse of the third in the series doesn't bode well for gamer confidence. But believe me when I say that if you like Civilization and you love fantasy, you'll absolutely adore Age of Wonders 3. With an astoundingly impressive character creation system and insanely deep mechanics for conquest and battle, Age of Wonders 3 is an addictive, endearing and an absolute gem, even in its beta state. Don't be concerned if you're not familiar with the franchise. Between you and I, let's just call this Civilization, Unicorns and Pixie Dust, and no one really has to know.